10 Secrets to Keep When Loving a Lord. Lady Eleanor Wexley had always followed the rules of high society. She was the epitome of propriety, with her pristine reputation and impeccable manners, carefully nurtured by years of rigid upbringing. But at 27, she found herself unmarried, watching as life passed her by in a swirl of glittering balls and meaningless conversation. Until one night, at the annual summer ball, Eleanor overheard a conversation she was never meant to hear, a conversation between her best friend and the notorious Lord Aidan Thorne, the devilishly handsome rogue who had scandalized all of London's society with his dangerous exploits. Lord Aidan, known as the Lord of Scandals, had ruined more women's reputations than Eleanor could count. But there was something about him that piqued her curiosity. And that night, after overhearing that conversation, she made a decision that would change her life forever. Eleanor would set herself free by breaking the rules she had lived by all her life. But instead of defying society openly, she would create her own list of secret adventures, challenges that would liberate her from the confines of her carefully constructed world. What she didn't expect was to entangle herself with Lord Aidan at every turn. The list of secrets. Dance barefoot under the stars. Sneak into a gentleman's club. Ride a horse astride in the park. Kiss someone dangerous. Gamble at the notorious Moonlit Tavern. Walk unescorted through the streets of London. Swim in the sea at dawn. Attend a midnight masquerade. Break into a duke's estate. Fall in love with a rake. Every secret she ticked off the list brought her closer to the one man she was determined to avoid. Aidan Thorne, with his rakish smile, haunted her steps as if he knew of her rebellious endeavors. And with each encounter, Eleanor discovered that beneath his wicked reputation lay a man who was far more than society's whispers described, a man as lost and lonely as she was. Aidan had never met a woman like Eleanor. Beneath her perfect exterior was a fire that intrigued him, a daring soul hidden behind her decorum. He knew she was trouble, yet he couldn't stay away. As Eleanor unraveled the secrets of her own heart, Aidan found himself entangled in her mission of freedom. But could a man like Aidan, with his scandalous past, ever truly offer a future to someone as proper as Eleanor? And could Eleanor risk the one rule she had never been willing to break, her heart? As the final secret approached, the stakes became higher than either of them anticipated. With society watching their every move and their hearts caught in the balance, Eleanor and Aidan faced the ultimate question. Could they keep their love a secret, or would they be brave enough to face the consequences of breaking every rule? 10 Secrets to Keep When Loving a Lord, exploring how Eleanor embarks on her journey of self-discovery and the growing tension between her and Lord Aidan as each challenge progresses. We'll go through each secret one by one, fleshing out the moments and emotions that come with breaking each rule. 1. Dance barefoot under the stars. Eleanor had always been told that a lady must never show too much skin, never draw attention to herself in an unladylike way. But on a balmy summer night, with the music from the grand ball fading behind her, she slipped out into the gardens. The soft grass beneath her slippered feet beckoned her further, until finally, she kicked them off and let the cool earth touch her bare skin. In the moonlight, she twirled, laughing quietly to herself. It was a small rebellion, but it felt thrilling. Little did she know, she wasn't alone. Aidan watched her from the shadows, intrigued by the carefree beauty who had always seemed so composed. He had come out for a moment of peace, but instead, he found himself captivated by the sight of Eleanor, her hair glistening under the stars, her bare feet moving to music only she could hear. When she finally noticed him, standing by the marble fountain, her heart leapt into her throat. He said nothing, merely inclined his head, as if acknowledging her secret. And then, with a slow smile, he disappeared back into the night. 2. Sneak into a gentleman's club. This one required more planning. No lady was allowed inside the infamous Knightley's Club, where the city's most powerful men gambled, drank, and whispered secrets over brandy. But Eleanor had a plan. Dressed in her brother's old clothes, with her hair pinned beneath a hat, she sneaked through the back entrance and entered a world she had only heard rumors of. The smoke-filled room was a world apart from the elegant drawing rooms she knew. Her heart raced as she moved through the crowd, feeling wildly out of place, yet exhilarated by the sheer boldness of it all. But when a hand grabbed her wrist, her pulse stopped altogether. "You shouldn't be here," a familiar voice murmured in her ear. She turned to find Aiden's dark eyes glittering with amusement. He had recognized her immediately, even in disguise. "And yet here I am," she whispered back, challenging him with her gaze. He leaned in closer, his breath warm against her ear. "Then let's make sure you enjoy your night properly." Before she could protest, Aiden had pulled her into a corner of the room, teaching her to play cards and flirt with the dangerous side of London life. But the true danger lay in the way his hand lingered on hers, and how his laughter stirred something deep inside her. 3. Ride a horse astride in the park. Proper ladies always rode side saddle. But Eleanor had never felt as free as the women who rode astride, their legs gripping the horse, racing across open fields. And so, one misty morning, before the sun had fully risen, she rode out to Hyde Park and did the unthinkable. Astride her brother's stallion, she flew across the dew-kissed grass, feeling the wind in her hair and the power of the horse beneath her. It was intoxicating to finally ride as she pleased. But, of course, she was not alone. From the path along the park, Aiden watched her reckless ride with a mix of admiration and concern. When she finally slowed the horse, he approached, his expression unreadable. "Challenging every rule, aren't you?" he remarked, his eyes sweeping over her disheveled hair and flushed cheeks. "Why should men have all the freedom?" she retorted. He smiled, but there was something deeper in his gaze, something that hinted at the truth he had yet to reveal to her. "Indeed. But freedom always comes at a price, Eleanor. 4. Kiss someone dangerous." Eleanor's heart pounded in her chest as she crossed this line on her list. She wasn't entirely sure what she had been thinking when she wrote it, but now, standing in a shadowed alcove at a crowded masquerade ball, she knew what it meant. It meant Aiden. Their dance had been electrifying, full of sharp glances and whispered barbs that barely concealed the heat between them. And now, alone, she felt the weight of her own desire, the thrill of danger coursing through her veins. She could feel his breath on her skin, the warmth of his body so close to hers as they stood in silence, the air thick with unspoken words. Her hand reached up, her fingers trembling as they grazed his cheek, and in that moment, she made the choice. Their lips met, and the world seemed to tilt. It was a kiss unlike anything she had ever known, dangerous, intoxicating, and utterly forbidden. Aiden kissed her like a man starved, his hands tangling in her hair as if he couldn't get enough. And for the first time, Eleanor understood what it meant to truly lose herself. 5. Gamble at the notorious Moonlit Tavern. The Moonlit Tavern was not a place for ladies, nor was it a place for the faint of heart. But Eleanor's list had brought her here, to a dimly lit tavern on the outskirts of town, where raucous laughter and the clink of coins filled the air. She sat at a table with a group of men who had no idea who she was, disguised in plain clothes once again. The cards felt heavy in her hands as she learned the game, each round making her bolder. She was winning, and it felt delicious. But then, from the shadows, a familiar figure joined the table. "Aiden." "Careful, Lady Eleanor," he said softly, his eyes locking onto hers. "This is no place for someone with as much to lose as you." Eleanor smiled, her heart racing. "Maybe I've already lost too much to care." His gaze softened, as if seeing her truly for the first time. They played, and though Eleanor didn't win the game that night, she realized she had won something far more important, the respect of a man who had seen her at her most daring. Walk unescorted through the streets of London. For a lady of Eleanor's standing, walking alone through the bustling streets of London was unthinkable. It was the sort of behavior that could ruin a reputation in an instant. But the thrill of her list, the freedom of doing what was forbidden, drew her to the narrow, cobbled streets where no one would know her. It was midday, and the market was alive with vendors hawking their goods, children darting between carts, and the scent of fresh bread in the air. Eleanor kept her head down, her heart pounding as she moved through the crowd. It felt liberating to walk without a chaperone, to simply exist among the city's vibrant chaos. but the sensation of being watched crept up her spine. She turned sharply and found Aiden standing across the street, leaning casually against a lamppost, his arms crossed as if he'd been waiting for her. "Taking quite the risk today, Lady Eleanor," he said when he joined her. There was a teasing glint in his eyes, but underneath, she saw concern. "And what brings you to this part of town?" she asked, trying to sound bold, even as her pulse quickened at his nearness. "Making sure you don't get into too much trouble," he murmured, offering his arm. "Shall we walk?" Eleanor hesitated, then placed her hand on his arm. It wasn't proper, but something in her was tired of always doing what was proper. And as they walked through the city streets, unescorted and alone, Eleanor felt something shift between them, something that went far beyond mere attraction. 7. Swim in the sea at dawn. The sea at Brighton had always beckoned to Eleanor, but ladies didn't swim. Not truly. They dipped their toes, waded in the shallows, always careful not to ruin their gowns or their dignity. But now, with dawn just breaking over the horizon, she stood at the water's edge, her skirts already discarded, wearing nothing but her shift. The cold water lapped at her feet as she stepped forward, shivering with anticipation. The wind whipped her hair around her face, but the exhilaration of freedom outweighed the chill. She waded in deeper, letting the waves swallow her up until she was floating, the world quiet except for the sound of the sea. But she wasn't alone for long. She didn't see Aiden approach, but suddenly he was there, waist deep in the water beside her, his shirt clinging to his body. He said nothing, only watched her, his expression unreadable. "You shouldn't be here," she whispered, though the words lacked conviction. "Neither should you," he replied softly. For a moment, they floated in silence, the sea carrying them as the sun rose over the water. And in that moment, Eleanor realized she had never felt more alive, or more connected to another person. 8. Attend a midnight masquerade. The masquerade ball was an invitation to shed her identity, to be someone else for a night. Dressed in a shimmering gown of deep crimson, with a black mask hiding her face, Eleanor moved through the glittering crowd, anonymous and free. But even beneath the mask, she couldn't escape the piercing gaze of Aiden. He was there too, dressed in a dark suit and a mask that concealed much, but revealed enough to identify him. He found her in the crowd, as if drawn to her by some invisible force. "Who are you tonight?" he asked, his voice low and intimate as they stood in the shadows. "Whoever I want to be," she answered, her heart racing. Here, in this world of hidden faces and whispered secrets, she could be bold, unafraid of consequences. They danced together, their bodies moving in perfect synchrony, the air between them charged with tension. Each step, each brush of his hand against her waist, sent shivers down her spine. In this world, she could have him without consequence, at least for one night. But as the music slowed and the masks began to slip, Eleanor knew that no disguise could hide what was growing between them. 9. Break into a duke's estate. This was the most reckless thing she had ever attempted. It wasn't just any estate she planned to break into. It was the Duke of Granville's, one of the most powerful men in England. She had no intention of stealing anything, of course. It was just another thrill, another way to test the limits of her bravery. But when she scaled the garden wall under cover of darkness, she found Aiden waiting for her on the other side. "You really do have a penchant for danger," he said, stepping from the shadows. Eleanor nearly jumped out of her skin. "How did you know?" "Let's just say I have a way of knowing where trouble will find you," he said with a grin. "You can't do this alone." They crept through the garden together, slipping past guards and scaling the ivy-covered walls to reach the Duke's private study. The thrill of being somewhere forbidden was intoxicating, and with Aiden by her side, the danger seemed even more exhilarating. But in the quiet stillness of the Duke's estate, as they stood close enough to feel the heat of each other's bodies, the reality of what she was doing hit her. She wasn't just breaking rules anymore. She was breaking down every wall she had ever built around herself. And when Aiden reached out to touch her cheek, his expression uncharacteristically serious, she knew the last secret was about to be revealed. 10. Fall in love with a rake. Eleanor had spent her whole life avoiding the kind of scandal that Aiden represented. He was everything she had been taught to fear: wild, unpredictable, and utterly charming. But somewhere along the way, he had become something else, the man who saw her for who she truly was. Falling in love with him had been the most dangerous thing on her list. It wasn't a risk she had intended to take, but it had happened slowly, in stolen moments and shared glances, in whispered conversations and heated kisses. One night, after all the secrets had been crossed off her list, Eleanor stood before Aiden, her heart pounding in her chest. She had done everything she set out to do, everything except face the truth of her feelings. "I've broken every rule, Aiden," she said softly, her voice trembling. "But this feels like the most dangerous one of all." He stepped closer, his eyes searching hers. "Then let's face it together," he murmured, his voice filled with something she had never heard before: vulnerability. And with that, the final secret was revealed, not in a grand declaration, but in the quiet, undeniable truth that had been building between them from the very beginning. And so, Eleanor's journey of breaking the rules led her to something far greater than she could have imagined: freedom, adventure, and a love that defied every expectation.